Shelby, hi. Thanks
Hi.
for popping in. Our first repeat person on the podcast. I think you did the second episode ever, and then now we're on 20 something. I don't actually know off the top of my head. Should have looked that up. But yeah, talk a little about who you are, kind of where you come from, and the work you guys do.
Great. Well, thanks for having me be your first repeat. I feel very, very honored.
Huge.
My family and I worship here usually at the 9:15 service. Been here for 5 or 6 years. We have 3 daughters, 2 in college. So my day job is CEO of Tenfold, and Tenfold is an organization that focuses on housing. So we have programs for people experiencing homelessness. We have financial education resources. We help people actually get into their first home. So we have a program that allows people to take advantage of closing cost assistance. So maybe they have trouble saving all that money to get in their first home. We can help them with that, and then it's a no interest loan that gets paid back when they sell the property. So
cool.
It allows people maybe who would otherwise not qualify for a mortgage to get their first mortgage. So we do a really broad range of services. We also do supportive housing. So over 100 families that have barriers to stable housing, we support them through case management, some direct client assistance, things like that.
Awesome.
And there's a lot of our funding for that is through government contracts with Lancaster County and HUD. And then we also are about 50% privately funded, like private philanthropy and foundations and things like that.
Very cool. And so you guys just did a low barrier shelter that just closed as we got into March here.
Yeah.
Due to, if I understand it, basically volunteers and there's security requirements. I think that might be interesting to talk about. Something you'll hear, so we're sitting in a very large church, right? And something you'll hear sometimes in the halls of the internet, where you shouldn't spend any time, is, well, why don't these big churches just open their doors and let people sleep there, right? Or something to that effect. But there are significant kind of legal, ethical, safety barriers in place. So talk about what a low barrier shelter is, why you guys were able to do it, because I think that's a pretty cool story, and what that journey has been like for you guys.
Absolutely. And also just want to thank the community of Grace community for support. There was financial support given to us this year that allowed us during the really cold weather to not hesitate and just say, we'll do 24/7, because we were really just an overnight. So the background is 2 years ago, there was no low barrier shelter. It was being built. There's a permanent low barrier shelter called Clay Street that is in Otterbein Church on North Queen Street that is year-round, has 85 bed capacity. So 2 years ago, when that project was a little bit delayed and cold weather was approaching, the county office for homelessness was trying to find a space that could be a temporary location. So we have this garage that's attached to our main building that was formerly the Eastern Market. It was built 100 years ago as a neighborhood market house. So less cold parking garage, more really cool building that happened to be used for parking, because that's really all it could be used for at the time. So we converted that last year, so 24 into 25, into a low barrier shelter. And then when Clay Street opened in mid-January, we just seamlessly transitioned all the people, the 70-ish people that were staying with us, to Clay Street. So it was a very clean transition, and that felt great. Fast forward to summer, fall of 25, the Clay Street shelter had been at capacity at 85. They were turning away as colder weather approached, 25-ish people a week. And so some of our services, one of our services is we have outreach workers who actually go out throughout the county of Lancaster and connect with people experiencing homelessness. So there are people in the city, but there's also people in encampments in the county, people that stay in their cars, especially in the county. I think there's a misperception that homelessness is just a city issue. And there's a lot of people experiencing homelessness throughout Lancaster County. So our outreach workers are out in the field, identifying them, trying to kind of get to know them, do what's called a chart assessment, which helps them get into the system and become eligible for resources.
Right.
So we were hearing that there was a need, like the permanent shelter was at capacity, there was still going to be a great need. So we decided in October that we were just going to reopen again. We thought it would be like overflow for maybe like 40 people. We hit 40 within 2 days of opening. That was December 1st we opened. And then when it was really cold during Code Blue, and you can kind of stretch your occupancy limits just because it's like a life and death situation,
Right.
we were upwards of 75 people.
Yeah, because even walking my dog in that weather was
brutal.
I would be in pain by the time I got out. Yeah, it's just it's lit, there's no staying outside option.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you pair that with people with like, no income that don't have appropriate, outdoor gear,
Right.
or their stuff gets wet, they have no way to dry it. So, so we once again opened December 1st through March 1st, and March was sort of a planned end date, partly because that's how we're zoned.
Okay.
So 2 years ago, it was an emergency declaration from then Mayor Sirachi that allowed us to open quickly. Leading into this year, when we decided to do it, the city asked us to get zoned for it, which allows neighbors to weigh in and, just make sure like health and safety standards are met in a more deliberate way, which we could. And our zoning is for 4 months throughout the winter.
Got it.
So the other thing that is helpful with having an end date is it allows you to work with your partners and say, hey, we're serving this many people. This is kind of where we think they could have eligibility for other programs, and help transition them,
Right.
hopefully to something that's like moving them through homelessness, not just keeping them comfortable in homelessness. And
Yeah.
that's really the goal of Tenfold, is to work with people and move them through homelessness.
Yeah, and I think the barrier of it can be so stressful and traumatic to get to a point where you're experiencing homelessness, and I'm sure that without the balance of what you guys do is the balance between the good stress of the end date and the bad stress of the end date, right? Because you want to say, hey, we need to move you towards something, and the deadlines help with that. However, at the same time, you're very sympathetic to people who are still struggling through,
Right. And
taking
there
that
were
next step.
new people showing up even in the final week of shelter being open, that people that we didn't really have time to, help transition well. We could send them to the other shelter and hope that they had space, but that's definitely difficult.
So circling back to something else you had mentioned homelessness is not just a city problem. You guys just completed, I think back in February, the time and place report. Talk about what that is. You train people like who know about homeless, know where to look, know kind of and then they go out and they kind of get a feel for how many homeless people experiencing homelessness
Right.
there are in the county. Talk about what that process is.
Yeah, it's so the county of Lancaster is called a continuum of care, and it's sort of a model that HUD, Housing and Urban Development. Sorry, there's so many acronyms in the housing world. I'll try to do my best to say them out loud instead of using acronyms, but requires you, if you're getting HUD funding, to do this. It's called a point in time count, or PIT count, they'll call it, and it counts both people living like in tents, in laundromats, in cars, areas not meant for human habitation, and it also counts the people in shelter spaces. So like for the 2025 PIT count, the number had gone up 14% from the year before, and I think it was like 597. Of that, about 150 people throughout Lancaster County, mostly actually in the county, not in the city, were unsheltered homeless. The balance of that were people like at the Y, at our shelter, at Water Street, who houses a lot of folks, things like that. So that's done on an annual basis. We don't have the results of this year's PIT count yet. That should be out, I would hope, in a couple weeks.
Okay, so
because that allows us as a county to plan for what's needed.
The increase year over year from 23-24 to 24-25 was, you said, 14%?
Yes.
Okay, and I think we talked last time you were on, that's just because there's just no vacancy. And even if you're in a good situation, like let's say somebody's in a home paying $1,800 a month in rent or something, you know what I mean? Like just as a ballpark, they lose that property, or they're in a studio paying $600 and their landlord decides we're going to renovate, gives them notice, I mean, they're not finding a place to live at $600
Right.
a month, so
Yeah.
And what other factors would you say? I mean, obviously, not one size fits all, but what are some things people might not expect that cause someone to experience homelessness that maybe you don't think about?
There's a lot of one-off stories I can share. One would be a gentleman with an intellectual disability who for years had lived with his older sister. And she or the family, probably because of the stigma, this gentleman's in his 50s at this point, had probably never worked with BHDS to get him a caseworker or, qualified for benefits. She had to go into assisted living because her health had deteriorated to a point where she couldn't care for herself or him. And unfortunately, there was nowhere for him to go, and he ended up at our low barrier shelter last year. So through getting to know him at low barrier shelter, getting him qualified for services, we got him an emergency voucher that allows him to live independently in his own apartment. There was a time when he lived at our TLC shelter after low barrier shelter closed. So it's just a matter of getting enough time. It takes time to qualify for benefits.
Right.
So getting enough time with people, having a case manager who understands the system, and helping people move through. I think the most alarming trend that I'm seeing, and so are other providers, is the number of people over 65, older adults becoming homelessness. And it's what you talked about with the housing crisis. So, a lot of mom and pop landlords that are selling properties, in order for them to sell the property, for the buyer to get a mortgage, they have to bring it up to code, which requires them to make investments in the property, which requires them to increase rents. And people on fixed incomes can't absorb that, especially if they're trying to, kind of align with what the market prices are, which have skyrocketed since the pandemic. So, but even people that are, would like to keep long-term stable tenants, it can be very difficult not to increase rents. So one of the things that we're looking at is an eviction prevention program, which we're piloting in Adam Witkonus's courtroom in Lancaster City, so once an eviction is filed, we get involved, figure out how we can offer financial counseling to someone and stabilize their budget, and then in addition, potentially help them with housing location. And then there's a home share program that's also starting, which is through the Office of Aging. So we in Lancaster County have a mismatch with, there's a lot of single person households, but most homes are multi-bedroom. So this would allow, as long as one person in the coupling is over 60, could be the person taking advantage of it, or could be the person that has the property. There's an opportunity to kind of match people together that have, larger properties that could accommodate someone, that would live there. They could either pay a stipend, kind of a small amount towards rent, like maybe based on what they can afford, because these aren't people with no income. Just people with not enough income.
And not a substantial family network, not a, basically what you're doing is you're saying, hey, don't turn your extra space into an Airbnb. Help provide housing for somebody on a more long-term basis.
And if they don't have, and maybe the person living in the home also doesn't have a great family network and needs rides to doctor's appointments or needs somebody to do yard work, but that allows them to stay in the property as well. So there's reciprocal benefits to that. So those are just a couple of the things. And then we're really also advocating for accessory dwelling units to be allowed by right in all municipalities. And that would be on your land that you own, where there's water and sewer hookups, that you could build or put a small dwelling. Cool. A tiny home there by right. And that would allow either a family member or just, be able to rent at a low cost to folks in the community and make that available. So.
Okay, so we talked about, I'm going to keep saying point in time wrong. We talked about point in time, we talked about Tenfold. I know there was something else that we talked about before, and it is escaping my mind.
I think we wanted to talk about sort of the city-county
the city-county split, because I think people think, I see homeless people in the city. I don't see homeless people down by BB's, or you know what I mean, or something like that. So talk about that, because maybe people would say, we have Water Street, we have Tenfold, those are all in the city. but homelessness is not concentrated.
Right. Right. I think it's just more visible in the city. There's, like the urban infrastructure, the urban environment sort of doesn't lend itself to people maybe sort of hiding themselves.
Yeah.
Where in the county, there's a lot of encampments like behind Route 30. There's a lot of just encampments throughout Lancaster County. And we know that because we employ the outreach workers that fan out across the county. Our outreach workers actually don't have responsibility in Lancaster City. Another, the Food Hub and Lancaster City Alliance's outreach workers focus on the city. Ours focus outside the city mostly. But the other thing I could share is we have the TLC shelter. This is not a low barrier shelter. It's one that people are referred to. And these are folks who are really committed and most likely have income, just need help kind of taking next steps towards stable housing. But about 50% of them, their last known address was the city, and the other half, their last known address was the county. And in addition to that, we work with the VA. So we have 17 beds, set-aside beds for veterans through the Lebanon VA.
Wow.
So I think that kind of demonstrates the myth,
because
we don't screen, you just have to have a last known address in Lancaster County.
Yeah, okay, so, and as you said, 50-50, so
it captures,
50 density, and when you account for population density, it actually probably shows that outside of, as a percentage base outside of the city is probably more likely.
Yeah, and then the other thing you can look at, because I know you like data, is like school lunch, and there's also, schools are required to report numbers of homeless students. Now, the definition of homeless for them is like you could be doubled up. You could, typically people that are trying to stay under the radar, if they're living in a car with their kids, they're not reporting that because that means children and youth gets involved. So there's some of that happens when, you see a high number of students being pulled out of a school. So anyway, it's a puzzle, but there are things you can look at to kind of tell you what's happening.
No, it makes it challenging. And my wife, Alyssa, works with Reach Cyber Charter, and they have a decent amount of students who the only way they can stay on pace at a school is to switch to cyber charters. And obviously that creates a data problem in and of itself too. But I think one thing she always says to me is like, I think people would be shocked at how often kids are just like, figuring it out in these situations. It's just more than you would think, I think is probably the short version.
Right.
But what does it look like for people to be involved to alleviate homelessness? And, to what extent isn't an everybody problem, right? Because I think it's an interesting problem because we all agree that we ought to do something about it, right? We all agree that probably people shouldn't be sleeping outside, in best case scenario. But I think there is a little bit of, not in my neighborhood though, or not, we don't want to overload the schools. And I think it's a tension to be managed, right? Probably not a problem to be solved, but how do you tell people to help if they say, how can I help?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is definitely in Lancaster County, in part, an inventory issue. We just don't have enough units for families, especially low-income families. So I also co-chair the Coalition for Sustainable Housing. My other chair is Chad Martin, who was a pastor at Community Mennonite, and he now runs Chestnut Housing. And they, on a smaller scale, they're doing one near Milburn Park right now. It's a 10-unit that was a property that was damaged by fire. They got grant funds to rehab it, and then they'll work with our team to support formerly homeless clients to move in there, get them access to benefits and things like that so they can sustain those units. But so there's some really unique things happening there. HDC put together enough grant funds to be able to do truly subsidized housing at the former UPMC site, or community hospital, some people know it. so there's 60 units there, for
Rockville is building, right?
Rockville is, but those are not subsidized anyway.
Okay.
They're just going to be more units, but that's great. It's,
Right.
Service jobs that typically don't pay a lot, bus route right there. So for people that don't make a lot of money, can utilize public transportation. And so that's a really positive thing. So we at the coalition just kind of advocate for like zoning change, accessory dwelling units, things that are going to help build more housing, but within urban growth boundaries. Like we're not trying to build on farmland or areas that don't
Right.
have infrastructure. Like we can accommodate growth here in this county, but we have to do it smarter. And that's
Right.
like building up, allowing multifamily properties to be built, because that's typically where you see people come out in opposition. Not even just like a homeless shelter, which
Right.
would be challenging, and part
Right.
of the reason we stayed in the city with our homeless shelter that's currently under renovation. But like anytime people want to build multi-family housing, people think of it as maybe what you see in town with Church Street towers, or really dense high-rise housing that wouldn't fit with the fabric of the community.
Right.
And that's really not the kind of the model for affordable housing any longer. It's really like you probably wouldn't be able to, tell what especially new product that it's affordable, but it's for people that are making, 80 to 100% of the county median income, which is actually pretty high, but it's
Right.
just preventing a lot of people from being able to afford a place to live, then save, potentially to buy their first home and things like that. So we're really
Right.
just trying to really like advocate for things that will serve more people,
Yeah.
serve families.
So just kind of be aware of what's going on in your community and
Yeah.
try to support this type of thing and kind of help the numbers game, if you will. And know that it's being worked on. So last question, just to kind of curious. I look at something like Park City, right? And it's obviously right now it's still being used as retail space. But every time I pass like a half-dead mall, I'm always kind of like, why can't that just be like a bajillion houses? Or is there any like work in kind of that area to like?
Yeah, because I think that's a trend that we're going to see as more like shopping centers, as people's habits move more and more online.
Right.
Those are going to become obsolete. So then, what needs to be in place in terms of like a housing complex would use a lot more water,
Right.
and sewer and things like that. So just like figuring out how to build capacity around some of those larger sites, but you already have traffic figured out probably.
Right.
There's things that are figured out and things that aren't. So it's just really thinking about how to repurpose those in a good way.
Yeah.
And I think like Manheim Township just updated their zoning ordinances and strategic plan, and they definitely have some of those sites
Yeah.
and definitely know that they need more housing. So
Yeah.
I think municipalities are looking ahead and starting to think through that stuff.
Yeah, I've learned so much more than I ever thought I would about just what zoning is and things like EPA regulations that require you to, if you're going to have a parking lot, to have stormwater management under that parking lot, and that costing, literally millions of dollars sometimes. And it's just, it's fascinating. It's something you never really think about until you have to.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people are also, including elected officials, starting to realize that 30% of the cost of building housing right now is, things like permits and EPA reviews.
Right.
Like how can we make that less expensive?
Right.
And how can we just focus on like the building code and making sure we're building, safe
Right.
buildings, but not making it so expensive that it's impossible to do. And then through our lending work, we also lend money to a lot of people who purchase like formerly or built as affordable housing developments. After 15 years, they no longer, in most cases, the covenant drops and they no longer have to stay affordable. And that's just when like a lot of maintenance costs and things are starting to pop up. So we do lending to like nonprofit housing developers to preserve housing that was built to be affordable housing.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah, that's interesting.
we work with banks who give us very low-cost financing in return for Community Reinvestment Act credits, CRA credits, and then we lend it to those developers as gap financing to keep properties affordable.
That's awesome.
So,
yeah.
so,
you guys are
there's
really kind
it's
of
like
going at it.
preservation, eviction prevention, temporary housing, just trying to keep people housed.
Yeah,
So.
okay, going at it from kind of every way you can.
Yeah, because
All
to your point about, everything that Alyssa sees, like once a family has become homeless, like the cost of that is really expensive. The trauma of that, especially to kids, and being uprooted is really hard. And, so anything we can do, especially in families to keep them housed, the return on that is huge. So that's a big priority for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Anything we didn't cover that we want to talk about? Or?
I don't think so.
All right, cool. Shelby, thanks so much for making time. And
bet.
well, I guess we'll see you again in 20 episodes or so. But yeah.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Know and Follow podcast. This podcast is a production of Grace Community Church of Willow Street, located at 212 Peach Bottom Road in Willow Street, Pennsylvania. If you're looking for a place to worship, we'd love to have you join us. Our services are Saturdays at 6 p.m., Sundays at 8, 9:15, and 11 a.m. This podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Pastor Addison Roberts, the digital pastor of Grace Community Church. You can learn more about our church at gccws.net. Our theme music is Only the Brave Run Wild by Sounds Like Sander. If you enjoy this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.